Well, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, our core objectives are nearing completion, said President Donald Trump in a primetime address from the White House on the ongoing war in Iran. Now, despite the assertion, key questions remain unanswered. What exactly constitutes victory, and how will the Strait of Hormuz be secured if the U.S. steps back? Now, markets reacted immediately, sending oil prices above $105 a barrel. We'll now discuss the latest with our guest in the studio, Marta Prochwicz, Deputy Head of the Warsaw Office, European Council on Foreign Relations. Good to have you back with us.
Glad to be back.
So, our objectives are nearing completion. It'll take a couple more weeks. Everything's fine. Any surprises, the immediate reaction to Donald Trump's speech yesterday?
Well, I guess the surprise is that we actually did expect something a lot more concrete. Throughout the day yesterday, there were signals that Donald Trump would present a more concrete exit strategy from Iran. There's been a lot of public discontent in the United States, throughout the world, really. The oil prices that you mentioned have affected populations throughout. And what's also very concerning is that precisely, we do not know when this war will end. And therefore, governments throughout Europe, including the Polish one, don't know exactly what strategies are the best ones forward in order to make sure that prices don't go up too much, that cost of living, which is a very big concern throughout Europe and in the United States, that cost of living remains low. But without knowing how long this will go on for, governments are having a hard time reacting. And the two people who know how this can end are the President of the United States and the President of Israel, who started the war, which was a war of choice.
Also, speaking of the war, one more time, we're going to, quoting here also from Trump yesterday, we're going to hit Iran extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Now, with the kind of bombings we've seen already and the campaign we've seen, in your mind, how harder can it get? How more intense could it get? And I suppose one question is, does that perhaps include something of what no one really wants to agree to, is ground troops?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of the ground troops, and there's also been actual movement of ground troops, American ground troops, towards the region, which is extremely surprising, first of all, because at the beginning of the campaign, I think that the President of the United States expected this to go much faster, similar to the incursions that he's undertaken in Venezuela, for example, and in Iran as well, earlier on in the year, and during his first presidency, taking out Soleimani in Syria. So these are the examples that he had. So moving onto ground troops is absolutely a major development if that happens, because it's just going to interlink the United States and bog them down in the region much more, and how much harder it can actually get. That's definitely one major factor. Another factor is what weaponry the United States manages to actually get hold of in order to transfer to the regions. And there's been a shortage of that throughout the world, which affects supplies, equipment supplies for the world and everyone who purchases equipment from the United States.
And that's also key, isn't it? Because I think one country that really needs that right now, that's been agreed to actually get a lot of this, is Ukraine. There's an article from the FT just run this morning where apparently some of those officials have said exactly this, that the Americans want to coerce the Europeans to get involved, maybe withholding weapons that are purchased through this program. Do you think that likely? Is that really something that could happen? Like, how, let's say, of a linchpin is this, and how could that go down if Trump does push that?
I think it is very likely. It has been happening throughout the last weeks. Actually, a lot of capabilities that are in Europe have been already moved to the Middle East. We haven't really taken too much notice of it. It's not actual troops, it's not army, but it's a lot of missiles, aircraft moved from Europe in order to provide more protection to Israel and the U.S. bases in the Gulf states. So this has gone a little bit under the radar, but it already has happened. Then another thing that has happened is the funding that goes through the Pearl program, which is basically a fund through which the Europeans provide funding for Ukraine for American weaponry. So money goes to the United States and the weaponry, the equipment goes to Ukraine. Some of that weaponry hasn't gone to Ukraine in the way that it should. The United States is calling on allies in order to divert, to have some of the equipment go to the Middle East instead of where it was meant. It also happened to Poland. There were questions to the Polish government about whether they would agree to postpone the delivery of Patriot missiles that were meant for the Polish government. I believe that there was no agreement from the Polish government because, as you said, Ukraine is the #1 European country right now that requires this equipment, but the eastern flank, including Poland and other countries on the eastern flank, also need this sort of protection from Russia.
You mentioned allies, and I think this is also something that has been hotly discussed. I mean, just also within the past day or so, Trump has said very directly, like he sees NATO as a paper tiger. He doesn't see any sense of being with NATO anymore, threatened even to literally leave the alliance. But at the same time, if we now look at the process of how that actually works, I mean, is this more of just Trump being Trump, threatening, and he doesn't carry it out? What kind of impact will that have on the alliance? Because in that speech yesterday in the White House, he didn't mention NATO at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated one. This is not new. We've seen this throughout. It's been a thread throughout the first presidency of Donald Trump that he's questioned the alliance and what interests the United States actually has from the alliance. But he still has not formally pulled out. So it's something that's being waived the whole time. The problem is that as soon as an ally expresses this sort of interest in wanting to leave the alliance, that already weakens the sense of the alliance, because NATO is an organization that runs on trust. And our #1 enemy in Europe, which is Russia, is noticing this as well. So there's a big question mark about whether the United States is a reliable ally and would come to the aid of Europeans. That is on a political level. In terms of that's the politics around it, and the politics for NATO as an alliance is just very, very is fundamental. At the same time, there's a whole layer of actual command and control systems, of regional plans, capability targets, of the capabilities and the troops that are in Europe. None of that, apart from the sort of small capabilities that I mentioned that were diverted to the Middle East, none of that has actually changed. So the command and control, some of it has been diverted towards European generals, which in and of itself is actually a good thing because it's the model that we should be going towards. But the United States has fundamentally not changed its posture within NATO. So it's a real dilemma for the Europeans. It's a strategic dilemma. How do we move forward, wanting the United States on the one hand and trying to convince the U.S. president not to leave, which is an approach that some have taken, including Secretary General of NATO Mark Rutte. And the other approach is, well, it's not a genuine commitment, and therefore we should maybe not push them out, but definitely not build on the guarantee that they are still there.
And then just final point, I mean, one of the things, we're not clear on any off-ramp exit. We don't know more than we did yesterday, but at the same time, the British are trying to put this conference together, 35 nations to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Where do you think this goes next? I mean, if the U.S. then maybe steps out, steps away, he said that in that speech, we don't need Hormuz at all anyway. Where does this go in the next few weeks?
Well, I think that they do need the Strait of Hormuz. It's just that it's an incredibly difficult undertaking, militarily speaking, to be able to clear that strait. So what the allies right now are doing, and this is perhaps in response to Donald Trump threatening to pull out, which is something that they want to avoid at all costs, but perhaps also and genuinely because oil prices have gone up so much because of the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. So it is in the interest of European allies to try to form a coalition of countries similar to the ideas that we have around a coalition of the willing for Ukraine, a coalition for clearing the Strait of Hormuz. But that can only be done once there is a ceasefire in Iran.
Mm-hmm. And that is still something that no one knows when that will come. We'll have to close it there. Thank you so much. Always having a pleasure having you here. Marta Prochwicz there. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.